Warning, the following program is extremely janky. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to the only podcast that accommodates your time blindness by being on the internet for the rest of eternity. Citation needed. I'm your host, Troy.
And I'm Aaron.
And I'm time blind. And it's debilitating, and I expect you to accommodate me by waiting outside my house for 20 minutes. Every other week, you come pick me up.
That seems like a pretty determinate amount of time for somebody with time blindness.
That's a very judgy tone you've got there. That's a very. Are you questioning me? So anyone who does not get the reference, there is a TikToker who has been going a bit viral lately. She posted a story about going to a job interview with a friend of hers, which I think turned out later to be her mother, which definitely changes the context of the TikTok a little bit. But she basically said that she went to a job interview, and one of the questions she asked was if they accommodate people with time blindness. And I don't think that's a real thing. Like, I think that's kind of like a manufactured phrase to describe a certain characteristic that is more or less prevalent among certain like brain states or whatever you want to call it, like non-neurodivergent or neurodivergent people. God, that's a mouthful. But she was like basically asking like, what are you gonna do to accommodate this in me? And her mother was like interrupted her and like changed the subject or something like that, or told her to change the subject, and then later on scolded her, like, what are you doing? You have to be on time for a job. Like,
yeah,
you can't keep a job if you can't be on time. Like, what's wrong with you? And this girl goes off on this long rant about like, I mean, I say long, it's TikTok, but she goes off on this rant about like, this is like modern work culture, and like this is the culture of not respecting the worker and all this crazy shit. And I was like, I as a neurodivergent person myself, I have a doctor's note. So if anyone's gonna get some time blindness accommodations, I'm gonna come collecting, first of all. But second of all, like, it does provoke an interesting conversation of like, where do accommodations begin and end for certain things? Because people with ADHD, they do have trouble with keeping track of time, like keeping track of time passing and deadlines, and that like that's a common characteristic. I don't think it's like a I don't want to say symptom, but like I don't think it's like an unavoidable. Like, it's not like somebody who, has cerebral palsy has trouble walking, Like, that's like a pretty definitive, like, that's going to happen. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I've only met a few people with cerebral palsy.
No, but I mean, it's a reliable thing, and it's also a thing that's like
somebody's paraplegic, maybe. Yeah, that's a better example.
Well, no, or cerebral palsy. I mean, the point is that those are meaningful disabilities.
Yeah.
Not that ADHD and ADD aren't meaningful disabilities themselves, but we're describing like the nitty gritty, and I find it kind of dramatizing what is actually relatively benign thing. Like, yeah, like time blindness doesn't keep you from having an alarm on your phone that says you got to go to work now. Like, and then you catch the bus. Like, it's not like there's just, it's one of these things like, how severe are we talking? I also find the use of the language blindness interesting. Like, we perceive time visually. I guess there isn't really, you can't really say like time lack of smell, you know what I mean? But like
time deafness.
Time deafness. I just can't hear the clock ticking.
I don't hear it. Time's not passing. Yeah. Well, actually, that's a good point too. It also probably severely minimizes
real blindness.
Yeah, like, and misrepresents the symptom, which is that you're not time blind. Like, you're not like what's the guy, like 10-second Ted from 50 First Dates or whatever? There's a guy who like or 10-second Tom, maybe his like memory resets every 10 seconds. So he like, the bit is like, he introduces like, hi, I'm Tom. And like some time passes over, he's like, hi, I'm Tom. Like, he does that every 10 seconds. That's the whole bit. So you're not time blind. Like, maybe you're like time nearsighted. Like,
yes, exactly.
You've got a time astigmatism. Like,
yeah. I mean, it almost makes it sound like they go through like these like fugue states where like time is just flowing past them in this uncontrollable way, or they're like time dilation. It's like they're high on mushrooms and they're looking at the clock and it's like earlier than it was last time or something. It's like, give me a fucking break, okay?
Yeah, like Adam Sandler pressing the fast forward button and click, and he just like realizes his life has passed him by.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, what's happened?
Time blindness again.
Time blindness strikes again. Only I could have been accommodated. Yeah, it's kind of wild. There's a lot of problems with it, but I think yeah, there's clearly things to talk about that are like, this is ridiculous, and things to talk about where it's like, maybe there's a conversation to be had here. This is like my favorite kind of citation needed topic because it's really funny. Like on its face, it's ridiculous enough to be like, wow, there's so many jokes I can make about this stupid shit. But at the same time, there are actually interesting parts of this conversation to have. For example, most employers will actually accommodate time blindness, just maybe not in the way that somebody would expect. For example, at jobs I've worked in the past, and my current job even, I have Microsoft Teams. And in Microsoft Teams, I have calendars. And the calendar has my appointments. And the appointments have reminders. And I can see other people's availability to reschedule appointments. And I have programs to take notes with. And like, there's all this whole suite of, I guess you would call it productivity software, like stuff that's like, Microsoft Office stuff that you could consider an accommodation for. I'm going to keep calling it time blindness, even though I don't really, I don't subscribe to that being the name for it. But there's a lot of productivity tools that actually, they actually are accommodations. Like when you really break it down for this thing. And not only that, but there are also accommodations that businesses have made since COVID with regard to remote work that are like huge for something like this, right? It's like some people might not realize that they are being accommodated in this sense, like being able to have flexible start times, being able to work from home and have that work around your personal schedule. Like if you forget to do your laundry, like you can take a 10-minute break at any point in your day and go downstairs to your laundry machine and just throw a load of laundry in, right? So it's like there are accommodations that exist for symptoms like this that are symptoms of like neurodivergent conditions and stuff like that.
Or any condition where there's like these sort of like relatively, presumably minor externalities. I think one of the things is I feel like this person's missing the point, and this is why this person is going to have trouble in the workforce, is they're missing the point of the interview entirely. Like, I think one of the things you make a good point about these things being taken into account in the real world. Like, people are late. People, but going into a job interview where you're trying to impress the person, you're trying to be like, I'm the best version of myself. Like, I wouldn't go in there. Like, sometimes I have like gut problems. I wouldn't say, well, sometimes my IBS bothers me and I got to go shit. And like for
20 minutes. And it's like, is that cool with you? Yeah. You're not just going to drop that.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't. Okay. I did not do that on purpose, but it was perfect, I'm leaving it in. That's good.
Like it's one of these things where it's like right off the bat, you're just like, okay, this person doesn't understand. It's kind of like a shibboleth. It's kind of like a thing like no one.
Sorry, a what?
A shibboleth is like it's a phrase used to kind of show that you know the culture, that you know what's going on with the purposes. You're kind of jumping through hoops, right? It's a ritual. The job interview is a ritual where you go like, they expect honest answers, but you're also doing it like it's like a sales pitch, right? Mm-hmm. And if you go, imagine like you go and you try and like buy a car. And the person's like telling you, well, sometimes it kind of shits the bed. You know what I mean?
Is that cool with you?
Is that good or
can
what?
You accommodate for that?
Yeah, it's like, and you're like, well, on one hand, I like the honesty, but on the other hand, this guy is not a fucking seller shit. Like this guy's a terrible salesman. So it's kind of one of these things where it's like, okay, you're missing the whole point of the interview process, and you're bringing up something that, frankly, is accommodating. Like some people will not accommodate. It's like there will be bad workplaces where reasonable things will not be accommodated. And it's meaningful to say, hey, like, when Amazon workers are made to like, they die of dehydration because they die of like hyperdiuresis or
Yeah,
whatever.
they have to piss in bottles or
The
something.
piss in bottles or something. It's like, yeah, okay, like there's a conversation that clearly needs to be had there. But if
Yeah.
we're like right off the bat, like looking into the nitty gritty of being like, you know, sometimes I just don't feel like coming into work. It's just a function. You know, it's like sometimes, yeah, that actually is a true thing. Like sometimes, and you show when you actually, you know, get a job, you show why, in a way, you kind of show, this doesn't sound very labor friendly, but you kind of show why accommodation should be made for you because you're still a net value.
Mhm.
But if you're just coming right to the interview being like, I'm a complete basket case, do not hire me.
But it's also like it's also one of those things where you present it as, it sounds like, if I'm taking her at her word, and like that her representation is an accurate representation of the events, it sounds like she presented it as an inevitability and as a she presented it as the person in a wheelchair would present needing an elevator. Like the person in wheelchair in the job interview who says, "Do you have an elevator to get to the second floor?" That's an accommodation that is like, there's no doubt, there's no questioning, there's nothing that this person can do on their own to deal with that situation.
Exactly.
Right?
Like that sort of thing is addressed in civil rights law often, right? And labor rights laws for good reason, right? And yeah, she's presenting it as though, and it's like, that's the problem where it borders on something that just sounds like a bullshit excuse too, where it's like, I'm time blind, and like you're taking it so serious, and like you need to accommodate the fact that sometimes I'm just gonna be late because I'm time blind. It's like, I'm not hiring you. Sorry. Like, I'm not gonna say I'm not hiring you because you're time blind. I'm not hiring you because you're in like you're a basket case. Like, get out of here. Like, what are you going to like? Yeah, I'm sorry, but that person gave me so many like red like flags of like, okay, like I can see why an employer, like I can see why you're having employment issues.
I also don't like that it's presented as, and this is something that I see a lot in politics in general. I think probably more on the left, but you'd be able to comment on that. That almost doesn't even really matter where it happens more. But it's this false dichotomy of like, you support this claim or you don't support workers' rights. Because that's how she presents it. She's like, well, she basically presents it as anyone who doesn't think this is a valid thing to ask for accommodations for is happy with the status quo of workers' rights and doesn't want things to improve for workers. It's like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, let's take a couple steps back here. Like, that is not the case. That is not, like, I'm an incredibly pro-worker, pro-organization, pro-labor, like, person. But this, I have a lot of criticisms about. That doesn't make me all of a sudden some corporate shill. Like,
well, and it's also one of these things, I had never heard of it until you sent me the TikTok and being like, check this out. Presumably the employer felt a similar way. You can't just go, hey, here's a condition that I could have just been making up on the spot. You've never heard of. I need a definitive answer now. And if I don't get the right answer out of you, then you're clearly a fascist.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not hiring you. You're crazy. Like, imagine, like, especially if it's like a front-facing role where this person, like, it reeks of entitlement. It reeks of entitlement.
Yeah, we should say there's a lot. Obviously, there's a lot to this a lot of context that we don't have, like, like what the role is, like what the environment around the role is, whether or not it's a remote position, whether or not there's so many variables with this that it's like.
I'm guessing, I hate to interrupt you, but I'm guessing based on just the whole thing, it's a very low-level service sector job because this girl is not like, she's not applying and getting an interview at like some significant role. She's likely never, I mean, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just stereotyping this person, but she comes off as somebody who has not been engaged in the workforce for very clear reasons. And I'm not talking about time blindness.
There's a certain decorum that you have when you're in a job interview, which is, you're right, it is very ritualistic. It's like doing the dance kind of,
yes,
it's like, neither party is really incentivized to throw all their cards on the table. Like, both parties are incentivized. Like, I, as a worker, am incentivized to kind of make myself look good and make myself look like a good candidate. Almost irrespective of whether or not that's actually true. And the company is incentivized to make it look like a desirable position because it puts them in a better bargaining position for like salary, for example, or if it's a collectively bargained position, it just puts them in a better position to get the person that they want. Because if it's appealing to everybody, then
They have a larger pool, and also,
pool,
it's also got to do with how tight the labor market is,
Yeah.
right? When the labor market's tight, then the leverage is in the hands of the worker, and the organization needs to convince you why you should work there.
So both parties have this incentive to kind of do the dance, do the ritual a little bit. And yeah, you're right. That definitely is the type of question, at least if it's asked in the way that she presented it, that it's not, you clearly don't know the environment that you're in, if that's the way that you approach it. Yeah.
Do you remember the interview series? Like, it was a montage from Step Brothers.
Oh, vaguely, where they both go in for the one job.
There's like a couple different interviews. One of them, they're like in tuxedos, and it's like Seth Rogen, I think, was interviewing them, and like it was a really good interview. Then like one of them just cuts this like long fart, and he's like, you know what? I thought this whole thing was like really funny, and like thought you guys seemed like cool, but after that, like realizing this is just fucking weird. You guys are just fucked. And like there's the other one where there's going like telling the prospective employer like, shut up, just shut up. Like, you know what I mean? They're literally saying
Man,
that.
I haven't seen it in so long.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like somebody who's like
almost subversive. Like you're saying, it almost sounds like if I had a hidden camera game show and I like got some job interviews and I was like, how do you accommodate time blindness with a really straight
some
face?
Project Veritas shit. Like, let's see what we
Well, I was thinking more like getting punked, but sure, that works too, I guess.
So you saw that there was a recent, somewhat controversial country music single release.
Oh yeah, what's his name? I can't remember.
Jason Aldean.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, or Aldean. I don't know. I think it's Aldean. But yeah, the song was called "Try That in a Small Town," and it was like pretty clearly an ode to lynching.
Yeah.
Like, not even necessarily racial lynching, although that's what it evokes, but just lynching in general. I mean, that's what it is. It's saying, you know, come be a city folk in our small town. And it got pulled off CMT and it became this big culture war thing. I saw Nikki Haley's campaign was like running it in the background because she's like, you know, I guess trying to compete with DeSantis and Trump for like the most reactionary candidate for the Republican nomination. But yeah, it was quite interesting, especially because one of the first things that I heard when I first heard about it was he was actually on stage during the Route 99 Music Festival in Las Vegas.
Okay.
When there was the Las Vegas shooting.
Oh.
He was on stage, apparently. That's what I read.
Oh, wow.
Citation needed. So that was the first thing that kind of popped in people's heads is like, this guy should see that violence is, and like guns, like that was kind of the other thing too, is it was like really gunny, you know? And so people are like, this is like really kind of weird for a guy that like
witnessed firsthand
the results of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really got me, I don't know if I showed you the thing, but I saw on Twitter he actually went to a small town once in West Virginia and ordered like 65 burritos from this place.
Okay.
And didn't tip.
I'm really waiting to see the relevance on this story.
Didn't tip jack shit. Okay, it was like $1,000 burrito order. Okay, and then so I guess some employee there like was like, this fucker didn't tip us jack shit for burritos. So he like complained and got like the employees that were on staff fired from the place. And so like the person's comment was like, yeah, let's see you try that in a small town, right? Which he did. It was a small town he did this in. And it's like, it kind of like just shows like a lot of these guys, like these mega rappers and a lot of the country music scene is like kind of just LARPing. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, dude, you're from like Fort Worth, like you're small town, like your town's bigger than mine. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even know.
It's like that Bo Burnham song. I can't remember what it's called, but he has a song that's like a country song, and it's like a parody of all country songs. And that's the gist of this song. He's like, you know, the guy singing is like never been on a farm or something, or he wears like $1,000 boots and like takes a private jet everywhere, but he sings about like trucks and all the cowboys cream their pants. Like, it's a really funny song. I'll show it to you after this, but it's really funny. He's got I cannot believe this, that you recently told me this. You have not seen Inside.
I've not seen it. I have not seen it.
My God, dude, you are missing out. You gotta watch it. It's an incredible, and anyone who's listening who hasn't seen it, you have to go watch Inside by Bo Burnham. It's been out for a long time, but it was like his COVID project, this huge video project he did during COVID, and it's like him in isolation, and there's all these themes of isolation and of like social media and like this weird dystopian situation that everybody's in throughout the pandemic. It's really good, really, really good. It just reminded me that song reminded me that to like badger you again to just go watch that special because it's so good. It's on Netflix, and there's another one he has on YouTube, which is like the outtakes of it. But it's more than just outtakes. It's almost like the cutting room floor where it's like stuff that it's not bloopers. It's just stuff that didn't make the final cut. So a lot of it is still really good, like entertaining content. Yeah, I'm just glazing Bo Burnham so hard right now. He deserves it. He's really good.
Speaking of things that we got to see, this big weekend in cinema this weekend, eh?
Yeah, Barbenheimer weekend.
Yeah. I was hoping
yeah.
I wouldn't be the one that had to say Barbenheimer.
Oh, it feels good to say.
Yeah.
I don't know what Barbenheimer.
It was a coup of marketing prowess. But like I implied, neither of us have seen it yet. I think meaningfully, realistically, like I'm not trying to fight the crowds that get in. It broke box office records.
Oh yeah,
like crazy. But
it's like the fourth largest box office weekend ever, or something like that.
Yeah, it was
like
insane,
huge,
insane. Yeah, like it was, which is a really good sign. And it's also me personally, and I'm not I went and saw the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm not anti Marvel or anything. But it's nice to see them like way outperforming Marvel this year.
Yeah.
It's like we need like, and it's funny that I'm glad Barbie is here to bring us cinematic quality. But, I guess I'm mostly, although apparently it's very good. It was, what's her name? Greta Gerwig, I think was the name of the director. It broke opening weekend records for a female directed project. It like netted like 140 million or something like that.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was over 100 million.
To like Oppenheimer's like 80 million, which was also really like quite significant. But like, yeah, Barbie just blew everything out of the water, eh? But yeah, no, speaking of Oppenheimer, it kind of stimulated, as one might imagine, quite an interesting conversation or series of conversations on left-wing Twitter and Twitter in general, where people were, and somebody made the point. The whole thing was obviously about the implications of nuclear weapons, and especially within the context of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were, from a human perspective, terrible events, right? But you got but it's not black and white like that, and you got a lot of very like context-free, nonsensical sort of takes on World War II that were like quite alarming, where it's kind of like, anti-imperialist Twitter appears to have gotten to the point where they're now saying like the Axis are the good guys in World War II almost. Like it's kind of on that point. It's like.
And now a word from one of our many sponsors. From the same people who brought you Toilet-Ohs, now introducing newly formulated Poli-Ohs, the only breakfast cereal that causes childhood paralysis. Perfect for the overstimulated child and exhausted parent alike, Poli-Ohs guarantees to reduce child-based movement by over 90%. Poli-Ohs. Brought to you by 4M. 4M.
Cause General Mills tastes like shit.
The thing that I saw about the Barbie movie being very like what's the word, like trying to suck up to China, basically.
Oh yes, the 9- line or the 7. I always screw that up. Yeah, of course.
They had this like map, and on the map there's this area. So there's this area where in real life it's like contested by. Well, I say contested. It's not contested. It's like basically China says it's theirs, and is it? I can't remember the other.
It's a dispute between a number of nations. Well, between a couple of nations in China. Basically, the 9- line is this on all the Chinese maps. They say that the South China Sea is theirs and is part of their territorial waters, right? And if you see, like, they claim waters that are like 700 kilometers from mainland China and are like 100 kilometers off the coast of like Philippines and 100 kilometers off the coast of Vietnam, right?
Yeah,
so they're in like a, it's gotten to the point where we've seen, Chinese vessels, because the United States also goes up in that area in order to make sure China doesn't contest. Like it's a situation of major geopolitical, tension.
Mm.
But yeah, like the Chinese vessels will go and cut close to American vessels, Filipino vessels, Vietnamese vessels, right? Like they're building islands. They're literally dredging up sand from the ocean floor to build artificial islands and put like airplane hangars on and shit like that. Like it's quite significant. But yeah, it's nonsensical, and it's interesting because it kind of actually relates back to some of the things coming out of parts of the reasons why I think a lot of anti-imperialists are so critical now of the American prosecution of the war in the Pacific has to do with the manner in which the Americans leveraged the war in the Pacific as a means of containing, basically containing a communist China. Even though communist China had not come into existence, there was still a civil war going on. What it amounted to in the long run was the fact that China's closed in from the seas in many ways by American allies. That doesn't mean they don't have access to the world ocean. It basically simply means that they can't assert their imperialistic interests on surrounding states. So me personally, I'm not very sympathetic to the argument, but it is a meaningful conversation in geopolitics, and very much so this Barbie thing relates back to it. I sent you the thing, right, where somebody re-edited it to be like, it was about the Falklands Islands instead, where Argentina is mad about the thing, and it had like Falkland Islands, Britain, and then West Falklands, Britain over Argentina, and it's like, people are mad in the butthurt nation or whatever. It was great. It was great. Any barbs over the Falkland Islands are always, I'm going to get flack from Argentinian viewers, but
all 0 of them. Yeah. So they had on the map, to clarify, they had this line that is like not there on non-China maps. They had it on their map as like if we don't put this here, we can't. It's a bit like Blizzard recently. Well, I say recently, but in recent memory, they actually stopped doing business in China, or they are stopping, one of the two, because they had some contract with a Chinese company. Because the way that it works is you have to, like, you can't, if you're an American company, you can't just do business in China. Like, you have to have like a Chinese company that basically handles a lot of your shit for you. And so the company that they had a deal with, like, they couldn't renew, or the deal fell through, they didn't want to renew, something like that, and so they stopped. And so now all of the Blizzard services that were in China are just like going to be non-existent, or they might even already be non-existent. But I remember before that was the case, a lot of the stuff in World of Warcraft was changed for the Chinese client in order to comply with like Chinese law and culture and stuff like that. Like they removed all the skeletons, I think was one thing too. And like when characters died, they wouldn't leave a corpse. Like they would like fall over, and their body would like shrink and disappear, and just a lot of weird stuff like that. But yeah, this definitely seemed like one of those moments where it's like, well, we want to make some money in China in our movie, so we better put this stupid fucking little line on this map so nobody yells at us. So
imagine if a movie came out where it showed Crimea as an undisputed part of Russia. Yeah, that's the equivalent. It's
pretty much.
It's pretty, or and they may as well be saying, oh, Taiwan doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And it may seem trivial to many people, but it actually demonstrates. I mean, I think it's pretty, and I don't think that this is something Greta Gerwig necessarily put in there.
No,
it's clearly
certainly not.
No, yeah, it's clearly in-house sort of like management decision, but it's feckless, and I really think that, me personally, I don't care about distribution in authoritarian states. I wouldn't mind having maps up where we're like, Tibet's its own country, Xinjiang's its own country, there's a Hong Kong People's Republic, everything, you know what I mean?
Let's go, yeah.
Right?
Let's go.
We'll have a map where it's like, we can just like dice up parts of Russia into their own independent states, Fuck distribution in those countries.
Let's go, yeah. Let's rage.
Right. So that's my position on all that.
So actually, interesting. Speaking of WoW and Blizzard, this was actually unintentional, but it worked out really well. I read a really funny article. I sent it to you. It was this Forbes article by Paul Tassi about AI scraping and WoW. This is such a funny story. So there's this website, one of many, I'm sure, that seems to be almost entirely like AI, scraping the web, like scraping Reddit for articles and generating articles from Reddit posts. essentially, no human hands involved, just like churning out like 20, 30, 50, 100 of these every single
a mill.
day. Yeah. And there's a lot of content on WoW that was generated that way, where it's just like basically just summarizing a Reddit post automatically, and that's the article. And I guess some people on Reddit got like kind of like pissed about this. Like, this is such garbage. Like, why is this clogging up the internet? Basically, why am I seeing this in place of actual good articles? And so this person made this Reddit post that was basically solely made to trick the AI that was scraping Reddit. And so they put a bunch of fake information in it. And basically they were saying, I'm really excited for Glorbo. It was this like fake made up post about an upcoming WoW patch that was going to add Glorbo to the game. And they're really excited. And it's like, this is the best decision they've made since moving the farm sim game to Storm Song or whatever. And just all this really fake made up. Obviously, if you play WoW, you read this and you're like, okay, this is a joke, right? Like, they made the
not even play WoW. I don't play WoW, but I saw Glorbo and I was like, that sounds like some Krusty the Clown dollar store version. You know what I mean?
Sounds like that Star Wars meme about Glup Shitto. I ever told you that meme? Oh, it's like some tweet I saw where it's like Star Wars characters will see, like, normal people will see a trailer, be like, oh cool, another Star Wars show, and then Star Wars fans will be like, oh, I'm so glad they're finally putting Glup Shitto on the screen. It's just like making fun of the fact that there's all these really obscure, tiny little things in Star Wars that just constantly get made into their own entire character or thing or whatever. Anyway, so it was a very Glup Shitto moment of like Glorbo. And so all the comments, the posts, like, there's all this fake shit, and it actually worked. It got picked up by this website. And they generated an article, and it was like sitting there for like a long time. It did eventually get deleted, probably because fucking Paul Tassi wrote about it on Forbes, right? But I thought that was so funny. Like, they just, it's that easy to kind of game a system like that when there's no oversight. Like, if it's just spitting out articles on Reddit posts, if you're not reading every one of those posts, like, it's very easy for one of them to just get glorboed. I'm actually going to use that as a verb. That's like, I hope that.
That's verbable for sure.
I don't think it's going to catch on. But if it does catch on, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
You got glorboed.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me of, have I ever told you about the Winograd schema? It's this interesting concept in computer science. So basically, you've heard of a Turing test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a way to tell if like a machine is a machine or not, right? And if something can pass the Turing test, it's purported to be sentient, or at least it can fake sentience, right? Well, the Winograd schema is like kind of an improvement on the Turing test. Basically, what it is, it's a collection of sentences, and the objective is to the participant, whether it's a machine or a person, is meant to read a sentence, and then answer a question about that sentence after having read it. So I'll give you an example. The trophy didn't fit in the suitcase because it was too large. So that would be the sentence, right? Then the question would be, what does it refer to? The trophy or the suitcase? And so as a human, you immediately say the trophy, right? Because the trophy, in order for the trophy to fit in the suitcase, has to be a certain size. Therefore, saying it was too large, well, obviously it's not the suitcase, it's the trophy. So there's this common sense kind of understanding of the context of the sentence. And it's a huge natural language processing thing, but basically, your machine takes this test, like your whatever it is, your AI, and it's said to have been closer to human language processing, the better it is able to answer those questions. And it's actually really funny when the guy who first created this, shortly afterwards, there was this company that set up a challenge for people to participate and like submit their language model or their machine learning model, whatever it is, right? And have it take the Winograd schema challenge. And there was like a $25,000 prize to anybody who could get 90% accuracy. So for reference, a person, like a human, on average gets like 92 to 98%, like mostly everything correct, right? as you would expect, right? They're not meant to be like trick questions. They're meant to be like context specific. They're actually meant to trick machines. They're meant to be easy for people and hard for machines. So it makes sense that most people would get that score. And the first time that they hosted this challenge was like in 2016. Nobody came close at all. Like it was like most of the participants scored like close to or worse than randomly picking, like flipping a coin and just fucking picking one of the two answers in 2016. And they did the challenge again like a couple years later, and like there was not enough participation. So, but interestingly enough, GPT-4, which is one of the later models, like one of the more recent models of ChatGPT. I don't know when, because that model's fucking changing all the time. But like a model of GPT-4 got like a 94% on this challenge, which is pretty good because GPT-3 before it got like 60 or 70 or something like that.
It was worse than that. It was like 30% or something.
I can't remember.
Like
it was bad. It was not good. It was bad. But
I mean, we can still see it's one of these interesting things where we still shouldn't confuse that for cognition.
No.
And because,
no.
I mean, it can just as easily determine, oh, well, the Glorbo was clearly too big to fit in the Gloomglop, right? And it's like, well, I mean, a cognitive actual knowing a language would say those are not real categories,
yeah.
right? So it can mimic human language pretty effectively through these sort of, I'm not saying it isn't a significant piece of technology, but we shouldn't confuse that for knowing.
No. It's just interesting that it's able to.
It's getting there. It's getting there in terms of
human language in this sense.
Yes.
I can't remember. It might have been trained specifically for this challenge though, which is a little bit like I don't want to say it's cheating, but that's kind of like Deep Blue played chess. Your fucking Windows 10 desktop computer didn't play chess. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like your TI-82 didn't beat you in a chess game. Deep Blue, which was literally made to play chess, beat you in a chess game. So whether or not it was actually like specifically trained to do that, I guess it kind of changes the answer, but still interesting nonetheless.
Well, and it's also, you kind of brought it up, but ChatGPT-4, as we discussed before, has been becoming remarkably worse over time because of this whole, the implantation of all this AI generated content over the internet, and then it being kind of re-input into the system. So it'd be interesting to see how it would handle that test today rather than 3 months ago.
Yeah, well, because it's also going to be reading articles about Glup Shitto on fucking World of Warcraft too. So it's like, that's like another nested layer of this. Is like it's reading AI content, but it's reading AI content that's like not even like, even that content isn't like accurately generated sometimes. Like sometimes that shit, it's a psyop too.
So let's just go through a couple of the things that I've seen happen in U.S. politics over the last week.
Sure.
Because it's been a busy week. First, I want to go to our favorite, not MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Thank you.
She did a couple of really remarkably collegial sort of things in Congress. She revenge porned the president's son. She brought she brought images in to a congressional hearing that had to be blurred on C-SPAN, and blurred, like it had to be blurred. It was literally like showing off the president's son's penis on national television.
Man, what is going on?
And, a couple of things kind of like really come to mind for me when I think of that. The first thing is kind of, because it's funny. It is funny, but it's also really dangerous and stupid. That's kind of where we're at, right? Because we see that, I mean, the purpose of these institutions is to compromise and is to have, there is supposed to be a degree of collegiality and of decorum in your behavior, right? Because that's kind of part of what the institution relies upon to function properly. And, I couldn't help but think, like we sit here, I can talk all the shit I want. I can say,
It takes learning.
I can be like I can call her Marjorie Taylor Gross. I love calling her that, right? Marjorie Taylor Gross, right? But if I were to, be elected to the Congress, I should not behave like that in Congress, right? There's a different expectation. You've sworn a duty to the nation. You've sworn a duty to the upholding of the Constitution, to the upholding of these institutions that are constitutionally derived. Engaging in that form of behavior is corrosive to those institutions and is, in my eyes, a abrogation of those duties. And that isn't to say
what does that word mean, sorry?
Abrogation?
Yeah.
It means to not fulfill. to actively or positively breach, say something, like to abrogate a peace treaty, right?
Okay.
Russia abrogated the grain deal by shooting a missile at the grain silo, etc. Right? I guess the point is if she wants to speak like that, she should just resign her position and get a podcast. You know what I mean? Like she's behaving like a podcaster would. You know?
Yeah. She get more views than us.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
That's a sad statement right there. That's a sad.
Well, we're cultivating different demographics. Well, I'll leave it at that.
We're working. Yeah, true. We're starting from a different level. You know?
Yeah.
We're just demonstrating the inequalities in our society.
Yeah. In this case, the intellectual inequalities.
Yeah. Marjorie Taylor Glup Shitto has a better fucking starting position than we do.
Glup Shitto. Okay, that's it. We're calling her Glup Shitto from now on. That's her name now. So what else happened? So DeSantis did a couple. Oh well, you know what? That wasn't all. You know what? I'll skip her. I've had enough of her.
Fair.
But the other thing was about that is by those images were stolen off his laptop. Isn't that revenge porn? Like, isn't that literally like a crime in a lot of jurisdictions?
Yeah, it's gotta be. Like
that's what I don't understand is like, I mean, she might have some sort of like congressional immunity, but like that's
kind of sus.
At
the very least, it's quite sus.
Hyper sus. What was that phrase that you used?
Sussy baka.
That's some sussy baka.
That's some
right
sussy baka shit if I ever heard it. Jeez.
So what else? So DeSantis. Couple things after his really cringe a couple of weeks ago. He had this really cringe anti-LGBTQ thing that was like,
looked like it was like a fucking Modern Warfare montage from the 2000s.
Yeah, exactly. Disgusting. So another thing happened where he reposted a video that had him in front of like the black sun or whatever it's called, which is like a neo-Nazi symbol. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah, bro. And at the same time as well, Florida, which he's the governor of, and his whole reform of the Florida education system to make it anti-woke, because Florida is where woke goes to die. Part of the new curriculum he's instituted says that, you know, slavery taught some of the slaves really good skills. Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at.
How can there be so many Glup Shittos in the world? How is this possible, Aaron?
It's there's a positive feedback loop.
Oh, God.
It's scary. It's scary, but I actually think that I'm actually hopeful that this is so over the top that like there's clearly maniacs and racists that this sort of stuff and just idiots that this will appeal to. But for the most part, I think that this is like, okay, this is like a bridge too far for everybody. And we can see, actually, I was looking at recent polling data. It was for New Hampshire, which is one of the early states in the primary season. DeSantis is down by he was down by like 3 or 4 points. Trump was down by like 8 or 9 points. And Tim Scott and Chris Christie, importantly, are all up. And a number of other people were up.
And they're independents.
Well, no, they're Republicans.
No, they're Republicans.
They're Republicans. But the reason, especially Tim Scott less so. I think Tim Scott's kind of a I've seen him talk. I think he's kind of weak. I think one of the reasons he's doing so well is because he's well liked as a senator among senators. He's a good guy, you know what I mean? But I've seen him like he was discussing abortion at one point and he was just totally like flubbed the whole thing. I mean, the Republicans do not want to talk about abortion right now. They're running a campaign trying to forget about the fact that they've really fucked that whole issue up for themselves. But yeah, so I don't really think Tim Scott's a very strong character. I think he's just kind of, I'm glad he's moving up in the poll because it shows that people are kind of moving towards alternatives from both DeSantis and Trump. Chris Christie is more of a hopeful case because although I'm not a big fan of Chris Christie is, the premise of his whole campaign is that Trump is a unique danger and is completely unfit for office and is a criminal. Like everyone else has had kitty gloves. And that's why I'm like seeing Chris Christie move up. I want him on the stage just so he can tear down Trump. I'm actually half convinced he's not even running for president. He's just running against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You know, and good for him. Good on him. You know what I mean? Like, I think that Chris Christie is also one of those, he was the governor of New Jersey. And he was a shit governor, frankly. But I think that, you know, between him being so vocally anti-Trump and him being from the Northeast, I think he does pose, like, if he were to get the nomination, he would pose a meaningful threat to Biden in the general. So it's somebody to watch for sure. But speaking of all this, actually, hate to stick on this presidential politics stuff, but did you hear about the no labels?
Oh, vaguely.
No labels. It's the political party that isn't a political party, but of course is registered as a political party. It's also, so basically the whole idea, I guess, is that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are both unpopular. And so we need a third choice, which is like right off the hop within the context of American politics. Okay, you're like an AstroTurf spoiler party. Like, give me a fucking break already. Like, it smells like AstroTurf, especially they're not even telling us. They're very well heeled, very well financed. They're not telling us who's financing them. Could be anybody, but no idea. No, nothing. Okay. And so a couple of names are being, they're talking about, I think John Horgan, I think is the name of one of them. He's a Republican governor. I can't remember where. Probably a relatively blue state or a purple state. Joe Manchin was another person that's being floated who, I'm not a big fan of Joe Manchin, but I'm not as critical as many people who are Democratic Party supporters, and especially people on the left flank of the party have been of him, because he's a Democratic, relatively conservative Democratic senator from West Virginia. So a lot of his positions and policies are kind of at odds with the party. But I was a bit of a defender of his for a long time. But now that he's potentially, going to run as a third party candidate against Biden, like, I'm like, okay, like, fuck right off. Like, just get out of the scene. Like,
So you might need to explain this part for me and probably
Sure.
for viewers at home. But as the average non-politically minded person, you may think more choice is more good for elections. Like, why not have I am not I'm not a huge fan of Biden or Trump, to be honest. Like, in terms of like capacity to be a president. So how would you explain to me why, like, this whole concept of a spoiler, like, what is that like?
So within the presidential election itself, because it really is a thing that is very kind of more specific to the American and especially the American presidential system than it is to, say, our system here in Canada, right? Smaller parties do have the capacity to come up and win in ridings, and in countries with proportional representation, like many countries in Europe, Israel as well. These parties aren't spoilers at all. Like, as long as you reach like 2.5%, you're guaranteed seats in the parliament, because they're distributed not geographically, but based on the proportion of the vote. But in the American presidential system, the way it works is each state is kind of like a mini race for the president, right? So whoever wins 50% plus one votes in a given state wins that state, and then all of the electors for that state are allotted to them in what's called the Electoral College. That's what it's called, yes.
Right.
So the Electoral College is basically all the states, roughly based on population, are afforded all these different numbers of electors, and most states work at that it's winner take all. So in this case, it really kind of creates a situation where any third choice coming in that's significant could very well swing the election one way or the other, especially when those particular people, like the particular candidate, is on a particular side of the political spectrum. So I'll give you a couple of contemporary examples. The first one is Ross Perot. Ross Perot, who ran for president in, I want to say, 92 and 96. A lot of people attribute Bill Clinton's Bill Clinton was a very, very effective politician, but he was definitely aided in defeating George H.W. Bush by Ross Perot. Ross Perot was this billionaire from Texas who kind of ran on this sort of populist. I don't remember exactly. It was like kind of a bit of a libertarian nut job from what I know. We were babies when this was happening, so forgive me for not being too well read into it. But a lot of people speak to that one. One that was really big when we came up was with respect to the 2000 election and the election of George W. Bush over Al Gore, which was a very contentious thing and went to the Supreme Court. But Ralph Nader, who was running a number of elections, ran, and a lot of people pin Gore's ultimate failure to get the presidency on Nader's candidacy. So, which in many ways could be seen as a historically disastrous thing, and one of the reasons that I'm quite skeptical of third-party candidates. The next time we really see it, 2016 was a significant place where this happened, where A lot of votes went to, I believe, Jill Stein, I want to say, was the candidate for
Sounds familiar.
the Green Party. So there's a couple of small third parties that exist in the United States that really don't have much impact, but do often run as spoilers. The Libertarian Party is one, and the Green Party is another. And yeah, so as you can imagine, the Green Party would siphon off votes from the Democratic Party. So
Right.
any no labels party, most people are saying, is one that likely will benefit Trump because Trump has a really solid base, right? I actually don't know that I buy that, but I still think that it's stupid enough. And firstly, there's a couple of things. Firstly, what is the ideology? What is the underlying principles of a party that is not a party and has no labels and doesn't have a position, they can say whatever they want is their position, but they don't have a position. Right?
That's it's like the planet Neutralia or whatever from Futurama, where the people are all gray and they're doing like a big vote, and the guy's like, I have no strong feelings either way.
Yes, exactly.
Like
yeah.
statement.
It's and that's not to say that there isn't a center path, but it needs to be an actual positive, meaningful center path that actually says, here, we actually stand for things. It's not just this little bit of this, a little bit of that. Like we just are afraid.
It can't be a null path. It has to be like in computer science, there's this concept of null, which is just the lack of a value. So like if you have a thing that is like true or false, for example, like if you have a database of people and it's like, is this person alive? Yes or no? Like you can't have a null value. Like either they're alive or they're not. It can't be like undetermined. Like we don't actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
well, and it's because that's not how, that doesn't speak to anything. Firstly, it doesn't actually speak to anything. We don't know what your policies will be per se. We have a bit of an idea, but, pretty skeptical of that.
It's like, yeah, like if you take any given policy, that policy could have like a range of positions. And when I say like the null position, that's like the lack of a value on that position at all. Like if you have something like, like public health care, right? Like, there's a range of positions that you can have on that in both positive and negative. But like if you have no position, no stated position on it, then it's like it's not meaningful,
Yeah, and even if you do have a position on given policies, you go, well, where does that come from? Like, why? What are the underlying, this is my problem with it, is what are the underlying principles?
What are the foundations of like,
how do we know what a good decision is if we don't have a framework for making good decisions?
Also, how do I know like what decision you might make if you haven't told me what you like? If there's a position that you haven't explicitly stated, how can I predict where you'll land on that position if I don't know your core principles, your foundations?
Exactly.
Right?
Like I'll give you an example. We can look at any given policy. Like I like the idea, and we discuss it a lot. And I actually just published something today that kind of deals with this, where, you can look at any given policy and say, hey, this side has good points on this and this side has good points on that. And we should create some sort of, synthetic policy from both and be open to hearing things from both sides. And that's a key element of democracy. But the thing is that centrism can't be just that, devoid of any positive ideological attributes, right? And this is kind of what it's going for, and that doesn't work. You have to say, like, for example, I don't come from policies and go, well, this is a good point and that's a good point because of this policy in isolation, but because of what this policy is with respect to what I see as the primary goals of governance, what I see as the primary goals of politics, which is, institutional stability and the maintenance of a free society, right? Those are positive, meaningful. That's an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
That is an ideological position, right? So people imagine centrism to just be, and what this party seems to be constructing is just this bland, almost technocratic, we don't stand for anything, which is in and of itself is actually so corrosive for politics in my eyes, because it's like, well, you're just obviously like, you're going to push people to the extremes because you're saying the center isn't an actual position. It's just kind of like this, we're feckless little losers that don't believe anything, right? Like you're not doing yourselves any favors, right? And the other thing is this, it's not even true. Like Joe Manchin, very much, it might be syncretic and confused and incoherent, but he clearly stands for something. It's, I guess, unions and burning coal. One thing I support, one thing I don't, right? I don't know what else he really said, but he clearly does have certain, well, I don't know. I really think, especially with this, I just kind of consider him really the epitome, the epitome,
I do that all the time. You know, it's a symptom of having read a word way before
I
you
read it in
heard
my head,
said.
said it out, and then
Yeah,
said,
that
"That's
dude,
not
that happens to me. Didn't that literally happen today when I said antecedent?
Yeah,
And you're like,
antecedent.
oh, it's actually antecedent. Yeah, that shit happens all the time.
Yes,
Dude.
yes.
It's interesting the thing about policy, like in computer science, it's so funny. You might expect as an outside observer that everything is kind of black and white, everything's very 0-1, like binary, right? Sometimes it is, but a lot of the time, the problems that you solve, the real life problems that you solve in computer science, are gray problems. They're very gradient. Like you have to consider edge cases. You can't name a main case and just stick with that. Like very often you have to consider all of the different like outcomes that come off of a particular situation. And so you have to look at things in a very gray and a very gradient kind of mindset. You actually can't look at them at black and white because you'll set yourself
Yeah, it
up
has
for
to be
failure.
spectral.
Yeah. And so a lot of these like policies, like the ideologies of a centrist, you would expect to be gradients. Like you would expect to be gradient representations of the left and right ideologies on that particular position or that foundation, kind of like blended together to meet in the middle somewhere. Or maybe not any given position, but like a constellation of beliefs of a centrist you would expect to average out to a gradient, like average out to gray. It wouldn't be mostly black or maybe it wouldn't be like entirely black or entirely white. It would be some mix of the two, and that kind of blends together in the middle.
Well, and I think it also speaks to, and I think you're totally right. I think that all politics, whether or not, or all functional politics, has a spectral characteristic. And that's really how any legislative body has to operate. Like if we look at, like, legislation can't pass, especially through the Senate in the United States, without compromise between the parties. Ergo, there must be a gradient on which these various policies, there's trade-offs and things going on, right? But the parties themselves and the politicians themselves and people who are politically active kind of imagine things in a very like this side and that side, this side and that side, right? And so as a result, that creates the perspective that the center doesn't serve a purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we were just kind of, like it doesn't have a position. But the thing, this coming back to this concept of the horseshoe theory, I think we're seeing an emergence of a new type of politics, really. And I think a lot of it's been accelerated by COVID, but COVID isn't a perfect example of it. I think the Ukraine, the Russian aggression against Ukraine and our response in the West to it is a good example of this, where you have a broad coalition in the center of people who are Democratic Party, like the institutional Democratic Party and the institutional Republican Party are on side and co-sponsor bills and are, and the extreme ends of the party, the anti-establishment ends of the party, right? Actually, who theoretically ought to be, one would imagine the far right and the far left are as far as they could be, but they actually remarkably vote pretty regularly together. Mm. A perfect example of this was the fact that, and I bring this up again in one of the footnotes to the article I published today. I talk about the fact that Ilhan Omar, and I bring her up among other people talking about, things I agree with, things I disagree with, to talk about, the fact that we do need to have a degree of we got to take some good and see what the bad is. And we can't just say, I completely reject or completely accept outside of certain, to use your phrase, edge cases. I would say Trump is that. Like, bringing back what you said about Trump and Biden, I would go, well, there's a pretty clear difference. I don't really like Biden. Other people don't really like Biden because, he slurs his words, and some people think he's ineffectual, and some people have vague ideas that the economy isn't doing as well as it actually is. Versus people don't like Trump because he tried to overturn an election and is a tin pot dictator, right? Like,
oh yeah, trust me. It's a gradient of dislike. Like, right. I dislike one of them a lot more than I dislike the other.
Well, and my point is it goes beyond dislike. I guess my point is this is going back to Chris Christie's say. Chris Christie, I don't like Chris Christie, but Chris Christie, I do not see, and I actually had not an argument, but a discussion with my father the other day where he said, well, Chris Christie is just about as Trump. I'm like, no, he isn't. Chris Christie did not try to overturn an election. Chris Christie did not foment a crowd of conspiracy theorists to go hang his vice president. Like, these are completely out of the bounds of regular politics, right? And we need to be able to say, hey, listen, like, regardless of our political disagreements, we have institutions that operate within bounds. To some degree, we actually do need to see eye to eye on certain key things. And if we move away from that, we move towards a situation where democratic governance becomes impossible, right? So, and I mean, I've been sounding the alarm on this over and over again. I'm probably starting to sound like a, I'm trying to think of like a mythological sort of crone annoying person, but that's probably what I sound like. I think, God, there's a term for that. I'll think of it later. I always blank when we're actually shooting.
It'll come up as soon as the camera's cut.
Yeah, exactly.
I will literally stand up and cut the cameras and be like, fuck, it's this word. Like, when I say this word, we'll put it over me saying it, and then like a little sad face beside me. Or beside you, maybe. It's your fuck up, not mine. I'm not trying. I remember my words. Yeah, right.
So speaking of Donald Trump,
That's always God. That's such a way to go in. Like I'm always like, oh, okay.
Oh, he's red meat. He's red meat. You know, we talk about we can't stop talking about him. No, we can't. I understand why. Like it's difficult, but we're in a really kind of glorious period right now, as far as I'm concerned. He got what's known as a target letter from Jack Smith. So what a target letter is, it's not telling you that you will be indicted, but it's telling you that you're, I guess, under potential indictment on a number of things. And here are the rough things.
And who sends this? Who?
It was sent by the special counsel, Jack Smith, I believe his name is. So he was appointed to look into a number of Trump's misdeeds. In this case, I believe the target letter was relating to his conduct on January 6th.
Okay.
Which is, it's great. I mean, he needs to be held accountable for this. And we see with this most recent one, there's a bit of, going back to how other people in the presidential race for the Republican Party, because most of them are just cowards with respect to Trump. But Mike Pence, who, frankly, I do consider weak in a lot of ways, he came out, but I'm more judging it based on how I see its impact on the broader conversation, which is important. As much as I might think he's weak, the fact that a weakling is willing to finally start to say and push back on something is
a good sign.
It's a good sign that there's some change happening in the Republican Party. And so he said something along the lines of, he said, history will judge him for that day, which he said in the past. And he said something like he said it in a way where he was like, I wish it didn't have to come to this, which is indicative of the fact that he thinks it's unfortunate, but potentially necessary, rather than them saying this will only damage the nation. Like that's what the usual line is they shouldn't do this. Yeah, it was bad, but this is not the way to deal with it. And this is,
So by him saying I wish it didn't have to, he's implying it does have to.
Yes, exactly. He's implying this might be extreme scenario.
But it has to happen.
But yeah, it's an extreme response to an extreme situation, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, no. So that was good. So he came out, swinging about that, as one might imagine. He's the things are piling up on Trump, like in terms of the indictments, and it doesn't seem to be impacting his favorability in the polls all that much. And the Republican voter really, it'll be interesting to see how they deal with this coming out of it, because I'm pretty hopeful that this will pass, that the threats to American institutional democracy will ebb and will, and there will be a bit of a reckoning period where I think a lot of people will almost I think a lot of Republicans, a lot of people on the right, a lot of conservatives are going to be kind of like low key trying to blank out the last decade, because like it's gotten to the point where it's like they're going to have, in 5 or 10 years, once Trump mania is over, they're going to have grandchildren and children being like, so what do you think of all of this? And they're like, and it's like, yeah, but granddad, like in retrospect, that's, like, that's like, what? Right. So I think it's going to be a bit of a bit of a block.
We might have to put another word over that. Just in post. Sorry, I can't.
There's not a lot of words that describe Republican voters as effectively as that one. Unfortunately, not all of them. No, there's a lot of brilliant. It's just we're way past the time of our William F. Buckleys, and we're now in the era of our Marjorie Taylor Greens, right?
Tucker
Tarlsons, exactly.
Oh, Aaron, how did we go a whole episode and not mention the fact that Twitter got renamed?
Oh, right.
How did we not? It's like we're at the end of the hour and I just remembered this. It's now x.com. Well, it's not, this isn't new. Like the x.com thing, the X thing is pretty old. It's just like, I remember reading about it.
The holding company was called X, I think.
Yeah.
So, but it would be kind of like Facebook renaming itself Meta, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
They're now the name of their holding company, and their logo, I think, is just an X in a certain font. I don't even think it's a trademarkable logo.
It's just the letter X.
It's the letter X in a font that already is like a typeface. So it's like you can't just like, oh, we've trademarked the X out of a typeface that's trademarked.
But also, who owns like Libra or like Times New Roman? Like, you know, is there? Maybe there is somebody who does own.
But there would be
typeface.
certain fair use things. Like Times New Roman is obviously one of those ones. I think that it would be the Times of London or the New York Times was actually the developer of the Times New Roman typeface.
Yeah.
Almost certain. I remember reading it. I think it might be the Times of London. Because I was, now that I've been playing around with this whole editing and stuff, I've downloaded my fair share of totally legally downloaded font types.
Very ethically obtained.
Oh, yeah, ethically sourced fonts. Yeah. No endangered
halal fonts.
Halal.
Yeah.
Kosher
fonts. Yeah. I couldn't remember the word. I know they're vastly different, but I just in my head it was escaping
vastly
me.
different. But you know what? Let's not touch that with a 10-foot pole.
That's for another time.
It's for another. Yeah, that's for another universe. Okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I guess that's a good point to call her for the day, eh?
I would agree. Yeah, that's a great place to stop. So thank you so much for sticking with us. It was a bit more of a political kind of heady episode, but that's the way it goes sometimes. We talk about what we want to talk about. So if you made it through all of this, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, critiques, or citations that we desperately needed, please leave them in the comments below. And if you like this kind of content, leave us a like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. Adios. Go to the fucking podcast.